Once upon a time, I was inmate 84622.
I spent 8 years and 333 days confined by the U.S. military. About 8 years in the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So how does a U.S. service member get confined to a military prison? Well, it all starts with a court-martial, which is basically a military trial. So U.S. service members can be court-martialed under Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. This allows Congress to make special laws for the military.
And boy howdy, did they.
In 1951, the Uniform Code of Military Justice went into effect, forming the foundation of modern American military law.
There are 3 types of court-martial: summary, special, and general. Summary and special courts-martial are small potatoes and result in, at most, a slap on the wrist. General courts-martial, on the other hand, are extremely serious and can result in the death penalty.
So the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or U.C.M.J, has a list of crimes, some of which are military specific, like
desertion, contempt toward officials, failure to obey order or regulation, and mutiny and sedition.
But the U.C.M.J also has a lot of run-of-the-mill crimes like
murder, rape and carnal knowledge, robbery, and sodomy.
The U.C.M.J also has this neat little feature known as Article 134.
The general article.
And this guy is frequently called a catch-all and lets the U.S. military charge people with things that aren't explicitly written in the U.C.M.J. Even though it's called a general article, it does have a lot of sub-articles that cover, things that happen, I guess, frequently. So it makes the jobs of the prosecutors and the courts a lot easier.
And these are
Oh my God!
So if we get back to our service member, I was locked up for 10 months before my court-martial and 8 months before I was formally charged with the crime. The Constitution's 6th Amendment guarantees a right to a speedy trial, and that applies equally to military courts-martial. The problem is that military lawyers, whether prosecution or defense, work together. So everybody involved in my case, they were JAG officers, Judge Advocate General. So for example, my defense lawyer got promoted during my court-martial and became a prosecutor. So he had to be released from my case. So there's no incentive for them to push each other or be dicks. So like I said, I was locked up for 8 months before I was charged. And this is because charges can only be brought against a service member after an Article 32 hearing, which happens after the investigation period has been completed. It's similar to a grand jury. So my Article 32 hearing was held in secret and presided over by an investigating officer, or I.O., who ran a pretty informal hearing and ultimately referred me to a general court-martial. Basically, the I.O. tries to determine whether or not the court-martial is warranted, but in my experience, my personal experience, he also gave recommendations to the prosecution about which charges he thought would actually stick and whether or not they should be amended or changed. I don't know if that's common, that's just something that happened in my specific case. So all in all, I spent 16 months in solitary confinement, 10 months at the Norfolk Naval Brig in Norfolk, Virginia. This place no longer exists. It was an absolute nightmare. I'll get more into it in a future episode, but this place had the metal bars, the small windowless cells that you would expect from another era. So finally, after 10 months, the day of my court-martial arrived. We started by meeting with the prosecution and the judge in his chambers. And like I said, these guys are all JAG officers. They're all Judge Advocate General officers. So they just kind of talked amongst themselves while I tried to look as remorseful as possible and disappear into the carpet. So at least in my case, the court-martial was scripted, so everyone had a 3-ring binder and just read along. I did not speak at all. Whenever the judge would ask me a question directly, my lawyer would answer for me. So my court-martial was really short. I pled guilty. So the judge just went through the documentation, seeing if he felt comfortable with my guilty plea. So the rest of the day was dedicated to expert and character witnesses who attempted to sway the judge's sentencing. In my specific case, the prosecution wanted a 29-year sentence. The defense asked for a 3-year sentence, and I was given a 12-year sentence. It might be surprising to learn that service members actually wear their military uniforms to their court-martial. So you go through this weird process where the prosecution and the defense verify the medals, the ribbons, the rank insignia, warfare insignia that the accused is allowed to wear in court. So in Norfolk, you were required to wear your military uniform in confinement. So they did not have specific uniforms for people who were confined. You just had to remove your rank insignia. So I actually wore my military uniform for the next 6 days until I was given an orange uniform and transferred to Quantico, Virginia for my government debriefing. The Quantico brig was operated by Marines with actual corrections training. So for me, it was a massive improvement. I was still in solitary confinement, but now I had an old wooden footlocker and a smelly wool blanket. So I'll talk about it more in a future episode, but it was honestly a massive improvement. After a service member is court-martialed and sentenced, the findings and sentence are reviewed by the convening authority.
The convening authority is the person with the authority to convene the court-martial. They're the person who got the ball rolling on this whole court-martial thing.
So if the sentence includes death, certain discharges, dismissal, or more than a year of confinement, then the case gets reviewed by a branch-specific court of criminal appeals and ultimately the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces. When I was going through this process, appeals could take almost a decade. I pled guilty and my automatic appeals took over 2 years. I actually personally know of one Marine who was released by his branch-specific Court of Criminal Appeals because his appeal stalled for 7 years. Now I think they have a timeline that they have to follow, but back when I was going through the process,
one did not exist.
So I spent an additional 6 months in Quantico,
home of the FBI Academy,
before being transferred to the United States Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Cause OG golly, I was deemed a threat to national security.
So my remaining sentence was short enough for me to be sent to the Navy's facilities in either Miramar, California or Charleston, South Carolina. But I was instead transferred from Navy to Army custody.
Thanks to that whole threat to national security thing.
And confined to the military's only
maximum security facility.
It sucked.